Welcome to the Alps, the greatest mountain range in Europe, known the world over as a top-class tourist attraction for its majestic peaks, incredible range of mountain sports, enchanting alpine villages, and its serene and mirror-clear lakes. The mountain range spans 8 different countries, from France and Monaco in the west to Austria and Slovenia in the east, stretching 1,200 kilometers. The Alps have a beguiling beauty at the heart of Europe, but at the same time one of its more remote and inaccessible areas. I'm Johannes Pleschberger. I grew up right in the Austrian Alps. The mountains have always been in the backdrop of my world, and throughout my childhood and teens, my playground. I could ski almost as soon as I could walk. Now I snowboard throughout the winter and return to my favorite alpine haunts year after year. In this 3-part podcast, I'll be taking you on a journey across the region, finding out about the remarkable wildlife we find here and meeting some of the people who make it their home. We're going to be looking at how climate change is affecting the people, landscape and wildlife of the Alps, and how some of these changes are happening before our very eyes. The Alps are warming up at an astonishing rate. According to the Research Center for Alpine Ecosystems, temperatures have risen by just under 2 degrees centigrade over the last 120 years. That's almost twice as much as the global average. One of the most noticeable effects of climate change is the shrinking of the glaciers high up in the mountains. Many of us have been shocked by dramatic then and now photos of glaciers which are shrinking away at an alarming rate. The largest glacier in France is the Mer de Glace, the dramatic sea of ice in the Chamonix Valley. At 7 kilometers long and 200 meters deep, it's one of the biggest attractions in the Alps. My colleague Ross Cullen is there, finding out what efforts are being made to save one of Europe's most incredible natural spectacles.
Thanks, Johannes. We're here in the French Alps and it really is spectacular. Mont Blanc and some of the other highest peaks in the Alps tower above us, well over 4,000 meters high. They're snow-covered, but further down, before the tree line, there are bare rock slopes, and a couple of hours ago we heard the artillery-like thunderous blasts of an avalanche and rockfall, boulders crashing down the cliff, leaving a ghostly plume of dust and ice hanging above. It's a reminder of the changing nature of this landscape, and it's a change being measured in metres, with the Mer de Glace, France's longest glacier, the most obvious example of the effects of global warming, and it's melting and lowering the length and depth of the glacier every year. We've been speaking to people living and working in this region. Here's Ludovic Ravenel, a glaciologist who studies the effects of global warming in the region.
This is the Mer de Glace, this is the main French glacier. It's the third one of the Alps. The name Mer de Glace has been given by the first tourist, 1741, 2 English guys. I've compared this glacier to a sea that has frozen very briefly. So this is the term sea of ice, Mer de Glace. And now the Mer de Glace is completely different as it was in the past, because when the first tourists came here, we were in the middle of the Little Ice Age, the last cold period. We had 230 meters more in thickness, and the front of the glacier was located 3 kilometers downstream.
So the glacier has been shrinking for centuries, but in recent years the melting has really started to speed up.
I am 38, and when I was young, my father, which was also a guide, was doing high school in the lower part of the Bosson Glacier. And when we go at the Bosson Glacier now, there is no ice anymore. The evolution in 3 decades is very, very strong. And what is hard for us to imagine is the evolution of the glacier for the next decades. For a scientist, it's hard to imagine the evolution at the end of this century. Probably we'll have only maybe 5 or 10% of the ice we have now.
That's a very dramatic projection. Is there any way of slowing that down?
we want to do something for the glaciers here in the Alps, we have to do a revolution at the world scale. What the people doesn't know, for example, here is the fact that the temperature evolution is twice or 3 times more important here in the Alps than at the scale of the Earth. For example, during the 20th century, we get at the scale of the Earth 0.74 degrees. Here in Chamonix, we have measured more than 2 degrees. So, of course, when we have a very sensitive environment because of the permafrost, because of the glacier, it is reacting much more faster.
One of the big attractions to the Mer de Glace is the wonderful ice grotto. You take a small mountain train up the steep tracks to the top of the glacier, then a cable car down to a platform, then walk hundreds of steps down to the actual level of the glacier. From there, you can go inside the ice, walking through a grotto that's been drilled. You're surrounded by blue ice, with only the drip of the meltwater around you. Mathieu Deschevin is the chief executive of the Compagnie de Mont Blanc, which runs all the transport in the valley, helping you get up to the glacier.
When you go to the Mer de Glace, to my knowledge, there's no other place in the world where you see the impact that our way of living has on the glacier. Every year we have to add an additional 80 steps for people to have access to this glacier. That's tremendous. It's losing like 6 meters of ice every year. And this has been going on since it started in 1996. So it's been going on for some while, and it's expanding, and it's going quicker and quicker.
Are there any other changes you've observed in recent years?
We do see more and more rocks falling. We do see more and more wind at the top of the mountain. Very strong wind. In the past, very rarely we had winds over 200 kilometers per hour. Nowadays, every 2-3 years, we have winds of more than 300 kilometers per hour. That has changed.
Well, it sounds like a pretty bleak situation. Are there any solutions to what we're seeing here?
The solution to this is a change in our way of living, all of us. By doing different things, hopefully we will reduce this global warming effect on those mountains. That's the plan for the site in the future. We will build a center where we will explain to people this sort of things. With scientists who can talk better than I can about solutions. We will pass on those messages to our people without trying to make them feel too guilty because they're on holiday as well. But the good news is we can see that there is a demand for that. There is an expectation which wasn't the case 10 years ago. 10 years ago it was like, okay, yeah, I can see this, but please don't talk to me about this, I'm on holiday. Nowadays, people come here to talk to the glaciologist who's talking to them at the top to get the beginning of an answer.
So glaciers are melting, slowly shifting snow and ice as they do. And that's been leading to some other unexpected consequences, like places moving from one country to another. Giulia Carbonara has the story.
At the top of the Testa Grigia mountain, southwest of the Matterhorn, a cable car opens its doors to let its passengers out. At an altitude of 3,500 meters, skiers and hikers from all over the world have reached the highest point at the Cervinia ski resort, one of the most famous and popular in Europe. Here you can ski even in summer, because we're so high up on the glacier, the snow never melts. Apart from a few lonely windswept flags on huts, tourists and sports people are largely unaware that they're crossing borders between countries. Switzerland meets Italy here on top of the Teodulo glacier. But there's one place up by the ski lifts that's rather confused about its national identity. Which flag it should be flying these days? It's the Rifugio Guido del Cervino restaurant and bar, an icy-roofed, cozy wooden hut that's been serving skiers and boarders slop-sized snacks in the sunshine. and often the icy fog, for almost 40 years. Then it was most definitely in Italy, but now manager Lucio Trucco is not so sure.
Il rifugio Guide del Cervino è stato costruito negli anni '80, precisamente.
The hut, which we call a rifugio, was built in 1982. It was used as a refreshment and rescue center by alpinists and skiers from all over Europe. It's always been an important building. It was built on Italian territory. The problem now is that the owner wants to rebuild. After submitting the plans, we're told, well, actually we don't know if the hut is in Italy or Switzerland.
The restaurant has shifted with the glacier beneath it. Climate change helping to push a hut over the border from one country to another.
30 anni fa il ghiacciaio era più o meno all'altezza del rifugio.
30 years ago, the glacier was more or less at the same level as the rifugio. But now, looking towards Switzerland, you can see the Trockener Steg station at 2,900 meters. 20 years ago, you couldn't see it. This means that the glacier must have been 20 meters higher back then. This is one of the effects of climate change.
The glacier is shifting, and so are the borders. At Cervinia in Italy, you can cross into Zermatt in Switzerland, or the other way around. It's recommended you bring your passport, and there are sometimes ID checks. But these are difficult borders to cross. The only way you can get up the mountains is by cable car, and unless you're James Bond on a mission, you're unlikely to be moving from country to country off-piste at 3,000 meters. The decision on whether to officially move the Guida del Cervino restaurant from Italy into Switzerland will be taken in November 2020 by a commission formed by the Military Geographical Office on the Italian side and the Federal Office of Topography on the Swiss. Alan Vict is responsible for marking the international borders of Switzerland.
Dans ce cas-là de Testa Grigia, il y a un bâtiment donc qui a un intérêt.
This is a commercial building, so there is an economic interest involved that makes a difference, especially for Italians. What is important to know is that Switzerland has never wanted to take possession of the building, but simply proposes to make an exchange of the surface area so that the refugio can remain on Italian territory. In return, the same sized area could be handed from Italy back to Switzerland.
For almost 600 kilometers, the border between Switzerland and Italy runs along snowfields and glaciers. It's impossible to place boundary stones or metal plaques in shifting snow. Boundary officials talk about something called the watershed line, an invisible marker which has become mobile with global warming.
Dans les Alpes, les frontières naturelles sont souvent la ligne de séparation des eaux.
On the Alps, borders are often watershed lines. What does this mean? It means that when you draw the border, you cannot put a marker every X meters. So, a border has been designated in words. In the past, borders were drawn on plates by trigonometry, so the accuracy was lower than today. In the 2000s, we agreed with Italy to use photogrammetry to map the shared borders. It was then that we realized the borders had shifted. In 98% of the cases, this was not a problem, and the two countries accepted this principle by common agreement.
This mobile border concept has been recognized by both Italy and Switzerland in an agreement signed in 2008. But at this spot on the Teodulo Glacier, the two countries were unable to find a clear solution. According to the current definition of mobile borders, the Rifugio Café straddles the watershed line. So for now, Lucio Trucco is hedging his bets. He flies two flags outside the restaurant, the Italian tricolore and the Swiss cross. In fact, Lucio told us that until the border dispute is resolved, he's going to continue to give the restaurant two nationalities. Perhaps skiers on one side of the café can enjoy Italian pasta and cappuccino, and on the other, Swiss roasties and hot chocolate.
Thanks, Julia. I'd be pleased with either the rosti or the pasta after a long morning out on the slopes. When you look across at the mountains, as I'm doing now, if you squint your eyes, you can see different stripes of color blocks and vegetation. At the very top, on a crystal clear day, the contrast of the blue sky with the white of the snow, the glaciers forever white, often shrouded in clouds. As your eyes move down the mountain, there's the dark rock face, too cold and inhospitable for anything to grow. Deep grey shadows also contrasted with the white of the snow, until your eye finds dark blocks of densely packed pines, a dark green, almost black. Below that, in summer, the bright green of the pastures, the places where shepherds bring their herds to feast on the nutrient-rich grasses and herbs of the Alps. Higher temperatures, melting snow and more vigorous plant growth have altered the dark forest lines. The snowy white stripes have gradually been getting smaller. The dark green forest stripes are moving higher up the mountains, and the verdant lush green meadows rising higher too and beginning to disappear. In Austria, according to ecologists, the area of alpine pastures has shrunk by about 45% in the last 20 years.
I'm not the type of person who just sees the cow as a number, who just milks her and moves on to the next one. You build up a relationship with your animals if you've grown up with them.
Bernhard Kendelbacher had to take over his parents' pasture farm in circumstances that were as unexpected as they were painful.
It was Pentecost, 7 weeks after Easter, when my father died. He hanged himself. And then 2 months later, my grandfather died. A lot happened that year. I asked myself whether or not I should carry on. Either I take over the whole farm and everything that entails, or I forget the whole thing. If you do not grow up like this, you'll have a hard time managing a farm like ours, because it is a lot of work.
Now 30-year-old Kendelbacher is having to learn fast, and climate change is making it harder. There's more vegetation on the mountains, and it's a challenge to keep down the weeds and bushes.
Why should I clear the pastures of bushes when it'll all grow over again anyway? I'm not allowed to bring more cattle up to the pastures, so now it's up to the politicians to give us permission to do more, because otherwise the alpine pasture will just grow over time and time again.
Klaus Witztum is the president of the Pinzgau District Chamber of Agriculture. His organization has been setting up schemes to try and find more efficient ways of keeping the pastures clearer and making life easier for farmers.
We are losing valuable feeding areas on mountain pastures, and so we have started to take countermeasures with this project showing farmers how they can regain the alpine pastures through controlled grazing. There is only one dominant crop, and that is the forest. So if we stop cultivating our land, the forest will reclaim that habitat.
Spring is now 3 to 4 weeks earlier than it was 50 or 60 years ago.
Sigi Steinberger is an expert in alpine pasture management and shows farmers like Kendelbacher how to prevent pastures from becoming overgrown.
Wir versuchen ausreichend Vieh aufzutreiben, dass wir den Aufwuchs komplett wieder abweiden. Winters are getting shorter and the cooling effect of the snow is not so pronounced anymore. Especially in spring, we're losing the glaciers and more rock is exposed. More heat is being released. In the mountains, there's a drastic change in what's growing. Because the average temperature is up, there's more biomass growing, not only on the pasture land, but foresters are also noticing more trees. In the last 20 years, about 45% of the alpine pastures area in Austria have been lost through overgrowth and land going fallow. And I think that's really tough. We're losing our cultural landscape.
At the same time, many mountain farmers like Andreas Tiefenbacher are quitting because of the very hard work.
Wenn man in der Früh schon im Bett liegt.
You lie in bed early in the morning and you just can't get up because your back hurts. And you know you have to get up. I remember the day, it was March the 12th. I milked the cows for the last time and then the truck came to take the last of them away. It was a really hard day, but I just couldn't manage to work anymore, and in some ways it was a relief.
Despite the struggles with the workload and climate change, the passion of these farmers has led to more opportunities, more scientific research, greater public interest, and most importantly, more young people choosing to work on the mountainside. I'm standing in the green pasture land. It's early September and the grass is a mixture of greens and in some places yellows, overgrown by weeds and scrubby bushes. I can walk easily in places, but in others the weeds have taken over and it's difficult to move through. Dwarf shrubs like blueberries and alpine roses have crept in, and in a few years trees might follow. Not enough cattle has been brought up in the past summers. Actually, when I was a child, I used to go with my family to pick blueberries from the bushes in the pastures, but little did I know these blueberries would be a big problem now. Comparing this and other pastures in the region with pictures we've got from 50 years ago show we've got a very different place. In 1970 the pastures were bright, almost luminescent green, the grass lush and reasonably uniform, a green velvety blanket scattered with alpine herbs and flowers. The darkness of the tree line behind the sharp contrast to the bright green in the picture, it's a rich mix of flora and fauna. This is the classic alpine picture you'll see on postcards, alpine chocolate boxes and Heidi, and what brings summer visitors to enjoy the rich but short-lived mix of alpine flowers and herbs in the pasture land. Climate change is leading to more extreme storms right across the world, and the Alps is no exception. The Research Center for Alpine Ecosystems say we can expect more extreme weather events, like the storm which hit the Italian Alps in 2018. Here's Marco Colombo.
This is the sound of a forest in the heart of the Alps. In 2018, a powerful storm known as Vaia hit the Alps in northeastern Italy. In just 4 days, gales of up to 200 kilometers per hour brought down a staggering 40 million trees in one of the most disastrous weather events ever recorded in the region. The havoc wreaked by Vaia is still visible today. The mountains here look bare, stripped of their spruce trees. But the local community has shown great resilience in clearing up after the storm.
Io sono Giorgio Leonardelli, sono un maestro artigiano del Trentino.
My name is Giorgio Leonardelli. I am a master craftsman from the Trentino region of northern Italy, where there is an ancient tradition of woodworking.
Ci si perdeva dentro, non ci si poteva infilare.
To begin with, you couldn't get into the wood because there were only fallen trees everywhere. It was like entering a game of Mikado. It was just crazy. When I could eventually get into the forest, I realized that everything had come down. There were only 3 trees left standing. It was like seeing all of our history falling away behind us. So now we have a lot of dead wood and we need to make things with it before it is no longer usable.
In his woodworking workshop a few kilometers from Trento, Giorgio crafts small speakers that naturally amplify music played on smartphones, thanks to a special design. All you have to do is to place the smartphone on the top of a wooden speaker and the sound is naturally amplified by the wood. They are called Vaia Cubes and are the product of a startup led by Federico Stefani, who was a student at the time of the storm. After seeing his community devastated by the winds, he decided to try and do something positive with the damage in the forest.
Noi vogliamo dare dignità e una nuova vita a questi legni.
We wanted to give dignity and new life to this timber. So we decided to create ViaCube so that we could use every single piece of wood that came down in the storm. I remembered that my grandfather gave me a small wooden speaker made with his own hands. From that object, I grasped this metaphor. We must amplify the history of this territory and the need to reconnect man with nature. Since then, we've worked with sound engineers, designers and local craftsmen. ViaCube is sustainable because the material is all local, as are all the people we have involved in this project.
But Federica's startup is not the only activity that tries to make these forests come alive again through music. One of the worst affected areas was the so-called Fiemme Valley, where violin maker Antonio Stradivari sourced the wood for his legendary instruments in the 17th century. In the Trentino Valley, in the village of Tesero, is one of the few companies in Europe which produces soundboards for violins, pianos and harps. Its owner, Fabio Ognibeni, has launched a crowdfunding campaign to help produce 30,000 instruments over the next 5 years from the trees that came down during the storm.
Diffuse nel mondo avevano individuato nell'abete di Fiemme.
4 centuries ago, the great violin producers had already recognized that the Fiemme spruce was the perfect material. It's flexible and light, and has regular fibers. It has become the world standard. Its Latin name is Picea abies. Just to give you an idea, in the Fiemme Valley, which is full of Picea abies, there are only 2 or 3 trees out of 1,000 which are suitable for the making of musical instruments.
La tempesta Vaia ha portato una nottata di grande vento dove
The Vaia storm was so powerful, even safe at home, we could tell that this was something really unusual and extreme. Over the following 2 days, we started to realize the extent of this catastrophic storm for our forest. Very quickly, we managed to get logging companies to bring the trunks down from the best areas to try and prevent them from deteriorating. They get fungus and mold if they're just left on the forest floor. We had to speed up the supply chain to have the timber for the music of the future. We set up a crowdfunding site called Save the Stradivari's Wood, and it was amazing. More than 900 people signed up, about a quarter from outside Italy. The news spread all over the place. We raised about 250,000 euros as a loan, which we are paying back over the next 2 years, as we are a non-profit organization. And this loan helped us to get an investment of 540,000 euros, which we have spent setting aside over 2 million cubic meters of logs.
When Vaia struck 2 years ago, it wasn't just the forest, but the local economy which took a battering. By using modern tools to raise awareness about an environmental catastrophe, craftsmen using century-old tools have helped keeping music alive in the empty mountains while the forests recover.
Thanks, Marco. So now, as the sun is setting over the mountain landscape, there's a slight chill in the air, and the wind is gently picking up. There's always a moment when the sun disappears behind the mountain, as if a light switch is being turned off, and the colors and atmosphere change. Blues and grays begin to take over the sky, replacing the bright colors magnified by light rays from the snow. The pastures darken. The snow on the white of the mountain tops becomes a purple glow, even visible in the dark sometimes when there is moonlight. Everything becomes quieter. In some of the tourist resorts, the ski lifts are turned off and the snow plows finish up, leaving the nocturnal wildlife to come out and begin their search for food and prey. So for me, This really has been an incredible journey so far. I hope you'll join me and our other reporters in our next podcast, when we meet some of the creatures and species that make the Alps their home. We'll be talking about some of the extreme changes that wildlife in this extraordinary mountain range has been experiencing in recent years. Don't forget, you can see pictures and videos of some of the fantastic places you've heard about in this podcast. See bird's-eye views of the incredible glaciers, the musical forest of Vaya, and the lush green pastures of my alpine home. That's all online at cgtn.com/Europe.